Wife with specific love. Today I want to do something a little bit different. I got some old copper wire here, and I have a wedding anniversary coming up. I wanted to see if I can turn this into some awesome looking jewelry. Let's begin. I first started by straightening about a 2-foot section of wire. It was a little stiff to bend, but it kept the shape well. I had to use some old heavy-duty cutters because the wire was pretty thick. The next step was to remove the plastic coating. The outer layer was a little difficult to remove, but after slicing long ways a few inches on one side, I was able to pull the wire out. The center wire was bare, but the outer two wires had a second layer of plastic. Fortunately, this plastic came off with a good hard pull. To start the process, I wanted to twist the copper wires together, but this would be a little difficult by hand. So I grabbed my drill. I inserted one end of the wires into my drill and cinched it down as tight as I could to prevent them from slipping out. The other ends of the wires were then clamped into my vise. At this point, I had to be extremely careful with the speed of my drill. If I spun it too fast, the wires could overly twist and I would have to restart the process. So I very slowly twisted the wire until there was an even design across the entire strand. Since the wires are thick, they stayed in position and the twist looked professional. The end that was clamped into the vise still looked decent, so I took some pliers and bent each one of the wires back towards the inside. This gave them a smoother and nicer appearance. I then slowly bent the entire strand into the shape of a bracelet. It was a little challenging to do this by hand, but it was possible. Once the shape was close to the right size, I trimmed the remaining wire. I then used some pliers to unravel the trimmed end into separate pieces. I then reassessed the shape and trimmed the ends to length. And as before, I bent the ends inward to create the pretty shape. The bracelet looked wonderful, but if I left it as is, it would slowly discolor, so a nice coating was needed for its beauty to last. To accomplish this, I grabbed a can of clear spray paint and gave it a couple of coats before hanging it up to dry. Looking back at my bench, I still had a long strand of spun wire, so it was time to make a ring. But not just a twisted ring, I wanted it to have a flattened texture. I trimmed off a short section and grabbed a small hammer. Using the flat surface of my vise, I started tapping the wires. The copper started to take shape with each impact, but it also started to bend upward. So I had to flip the metal over several times during this process. The quality of the final shape amazed me. I then used a piece of 1/2 inch CPVC as a sizing tool. You can use about any hard round tubing or metal for this step. I carefully wrapped the copper around the pipe with just a slight offset so the thread would just bypass each side. To get the final shape, I clamped one end of the wire in my vise and used pliers to tighten everything. I then trimmed the excess and pushed the two ends together. To remove any sharp edges, I used a small file to make them smooth. And with a quick coating of paint, the ring was finished. I then started wondering if I could make words using copper wire, so I started playing with my writing style. As I was writing, I realized that it would be a little difficult to make some of these bends by hand, so I needed a way to hold the wire and still bend it. So I took the best design and glued that paper to a piece of wood. I grabbed a bunch of small nails and placed them at most of the bends in the writing. Realizing at this point the original wire would be too thick to make some of these shapes, I had to step down to a smaller copper wire. With a slow, careful wrapping process, the copper took shape and looked great. I then had to remove all the nails to gain access to the design. And I finally gave them a quick spray of paint. Well, here's the final product. This was the spun bracelet with the 3 separate pieces of wire. Here is the spun and hammered ring. It actually turned out to be a very cool. My son loves that one. I did just a single strand of wire wrapped around itself and back through and folded it over. Looks like a cool little heart. And then one last technique, I tried to do a braided bracelet, and it turned out better than I expected. Well, honey, I love you. Happy anniversary. I hope you enjoy these presents.